There are questions that rise and fall with the tides of time, and there are questions that never die. They do not fade with age nor vanish with experience. One such question has echoed through the chambers of every human heart, whispered beneath every night sky, and cried out in every moment of silence, "Who's God?" For some, it begins in childhood, gazing at stars too vast to comprehend, wondering who made them. For others, it strikes in suffering, when pain stirs the soul to seek purpose, and for many, the question lingers quietly in the background, like a forgotten melody returning in moments of loss, awe, or unexplainable peace. But how can we speak of someone we cannot see? How can the mind touch the unseen, or the heart embrace what has no shape? Some say God is distant, a cold architect of the cosmos who set things in motion and stepped away. Others claim he is a judge, hidden behind rules and rituals. Some deny him entirely, saying he is a myth born of human need. And yet, in every age, there are those who declare with trembling voices and burning hearts, "I have met him," not with their eyes but with something deeper. This story is not just about facts or theology. It is about a journey, the journey of one soul, perhaps much like yours, who dares to ask the ancient question and walk into its mystery. It is a path not marked by maps but by moments, a story shaped not by answers but by presence. In this tale, you will not find God explained, you will find him encountered. Come now, step gently into the sacred unknown. Listen not just with your ears but with your spirit. For the one who is invisible is also the one who's closer than your breath. And if you are still enough, you just might hear him whisper your name. His name was Elior. He was neither prophet nor priest, not a man of great renown nor of deep education. He lived in a time that could have been now or long ago, in a quiet village wrapped in hills, where days passed slowly and the world outside rarely disturbed the peace. He worked with his hands, tending olive trees by day and mending wooden gates for neighbors by nightfall. Yet inside him there was a noise louder than the silence he lived in. Elior could not name the hunger that woke him before dawn, or the weight that settled on his chest as the stars appeared. There was nothing wrong, and yet nothing felt right. The days were full, but his soul was empty. He walked through life as though wearing a cloak of quiet confusion, able to smile, able to laugh, but always carrying something unanswered within. It was not grief, it was not fear, it was something deeper, a longing, a yearning that stretched beyond words. He had tried to fill it once with ambition, another time with solitude, even with religion, but none had reached the aching space in him. One evening, as dusk colored the sky in a wash of purple and gold, Elior sat by a stream that trickled gently past the village. The breeze was soft, and the trees whispered with a rhythm that felt almost holy. He dipped his fingers into the water and whispered into the wind, "If you are there, why do you hide?" The words surprised him. He had never dared to speak them aloud, not to the villagers, not even to himself. Yet they spilled from his lips like a confession, as if the wind itself had drawn them out. He listened for a reply. There was none, only the stream, the trees, and the vast silence above. But in that silence, something stirred, not outside him, but within. A stillness, not empty, but full, not an answer, yet not entirely absent. He stayed there long after the sun slipped behind the hills, his eyes lost in the heavens. That night, under the veil of stars, Something changed. Not much, just a shift subtle but real. He did not see a vision. He did not hear a voice, but he felt watched. Not in fear, but in wonder, as if someone had noticed him, really noticed him for the first time in his life. The next morning, Elior rose before the sun. He returned to the stream, not because he expected anything, but because something in him had awakened. He did not bring scrolls or prayers, only his questions and his silence. And so began his journey, not with lightning or thunder, but with stillness and hunger. The question had been asked. The echo had stirred the air. Who is God? He did not yet know. But something told him that if he kept listening, not with ears, but with heart, he would one day know not just the answer, but the presence. The days passed, and Elior returned to the stream each morning. He brought no expectations, no rituals, only presence. Sometimes he sat in silence. Sometimes he whispered his thoughts into the morning mist. At first it felt foolish, like speaking into emptiness. But slowly something inside him began to shift. He could not explain it, only feel it, like the way the earth softens after many rains. Though nothing appears to change on the surface, one morning a shepherd named Lamech passed by and saw Elior seated beside the water. "You wait for someone?" Lamech asked, smiling. Elior hesitated, then answered, "Perhaps." Lamech chuckled and moved on, but Elior remained. His reply had surprised even himself. Who was he waiting for? Later that day, while trimming a broken branch from one of his olive trees, a sudden thought passed through Elior's mind, not like his usual ones, but clearer, deeper, and quiet. It was not in words, yet somehow it formed a message. What you seek is already near. He paused, the pruning knife still in his hand. The thought had not come from him, or had it? It was not loud, not foreign. It had come gently, like a feather brushing past the heart, a voice without sound, a whisper not of air but of being. He stood still, the sun warm on his shoulders, the olive leaves rustling above him. He looked around. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. For the first time he wondered, had God spoken? Not through thunder, not through fire, but through his own thoughts, those few rare ones that seemed to glow from within. That evening he walked the village paths alone. The world looked the same, children laughing, women drawing water, old men arguing over grain. But Elior walked as one who saw beyond the surface. He noticed the kindness in a neighbor's eyes. He heard something sacred in a child's laughter. Even the dust rising from the ground seemed alive. Was it possible that God had always been near but unseen? I noticed that night as Elior lay on his mat, staring into the dim glow of his oil lamp. The whisper returned not in sound, but in stillness. You seek me beyond the veil, but I am already inside the veil of your own soul. A chill ran down his spine, but it was not fear. It was reverence. He sat up slowly, his heart beating strong. "Is that you?" he whispered. No reply came. No fire, no wind, only stillness and presence. In that moment, Elior understood something new. God did not always come to break the silence. Sometimes God came as the silence. He lay down again, not with answers, but with peace. From that night forward, the question no longer haunted him, it guided him. He did not yet know God's name, but he had begun to know his ways, not as a God far away, but as one who speaks without sound. Weeks passed. The village began to notice changes in Elior. He still worked his fields, still greeted his neighbors, still walked the same dusty roads, but something in his eyes had deepened. He spoke less, but listened more. He smiled often, but not lightly. Those close to him said he had become quieter, more reflective. Some said he was wandering too close to the edge of solitude. Others said he had become strange, but Elior was not concerned with how he appeared. He was being led somehow into an inner land he had never traveled. A vast, wordless place inside him. The more he listened in silence, the more he became aware of a presence that seemed to dwell in the very fabric of his being. Not just near, but within, and yet, just as he began to grow comfortable with this quiet nearness of God, the silence turned cold. It began one morning at the stream. The water still flowed, the wind still danced through the reeds, but something was missing. The stillness that once pulsed with life now felt empty, hollow. He waited, he prayed, he whispered, he listened. Nothing. The voice without sound had vanished. The warmth had faded. The nearness had withdrawn. He tried again the next day and the next. But the silence now felt heavier than before, not full, but blank, as though the heavens had closed their windows, and the wine no longer carried any message. Elior's heart trembled. Had he done something wrong? Had God left? He searched his thoughts, retraced his steps, repented of words he had not even spoken, but the silence remained. And so he wandered into the hills, not to escape, but to seek. He brought only water, a cloak, and his hunger. He walked until the village was far behind and the world was stripped bare. No walls, no voices, just sand, stone, and sky. There, in the barren wilderness, Elior cried aloud, "Why have you hidden from me?" His voice echoed against the hills. Nothing answered. He knelt on the ground, the sun fierce on his back, his soul aching. I was beginning to believe, beginning to trust, and now you are gone. Tears fell not of despair, but of confusion. But even in his grief, Elior noticed something. He had not come here to prove God. He had come because he could not bear to be apart from him. Even in doubt, his soul was reaching longing. And suddenly, like a wind that shifts direction, a memory returned, the whisper he had once heard. What you seek is already near. The words struck him differently now. Could it be that even in this emptiness, God was still near, not as warmth, not as a voice, but as the hunger itself? Was the ache not a sign of absence, but of presence unrecognized? Elior lay back on the rocky earth, eyes closed, heart open. He stopped praying with words, and he simply was. In the silence, in the dryness, in the absence, something subtle stirred. Not light, not fire, but faith. Not a faith built on feeling, but one born in the dark, a quiet, trembling trust that even when unseen, even when unfelt, God remained. Not gone, just hidden, like roots beneath the soul, like stars behind the daylight sky, like breath we do not see, but cannot live without. Elior whispered, barely audible, "I still believe." The wind rustled the stones, and though no voice replied, his soul was no longer alone. The sun was setting when Elior returned from the hills. Dust covered his cloak. His lips were parched, and his spirit quieted, not because he found the answers he had sought, but because he had found something deeper, the courage to walk with unanswered questions. The village welcomed him as they would any traveler returning from the wilderness, with mild curiosity and a warm meal. Life went on as before, yet for Elior something had shifted. He no longer searched the skies for a sign or strained his soul for a sound. He had come to rest in a strange peace. God was not always to be found in clarity. Sometimes he was most present in mystery. One night, as the air turned cool and the sky filled with stars, Elior walked to the outskirts of the village. There, near the base of an old fig tree, a small fire flickered, and beside it sat a stranger. He was wrapped in a worn traveler's cloak, his eyes reflecting the firelight. His face was weathered, but his presence was calm, like someone who had walked many roads and had learned to listen more than speak. Elior hesitated. The man looked up and gestured to the space beside him. Come, the fire is for all. Elior sat down. For a while, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks into the night. You've been searching, the stranger said at last, not as a question, but as a knowing. Elior turned to him slowly. I have. And what have you found? Elior's brow furrowed. Silence. Mostly hunger, a sense that God is near, then gone, present, then hidden. I thought I had found him, but then he vanished. The stranger nodded. You have stepped into the holy paradox. Elior tilted his head. To what? The place where God is both seen and unseen, heard and unheard, where he draws close but not to be captured, where he touches the soul but not always the mind. Elior stared into the fire. Why would he do that? The stranger leaned closer, his voice softened. Because if he showed himself always, you would seek signs instead of him. You would love the light and forget the source. But when he hides, it teaches you to look deeper, not with your eyes, but with your spirit. To love him not for what he gives, but for who he is. Elior's heart stirred. Then the silence is part of the path. The man smiled. The silence is the fire that burns away illusion. They sat quietly again. The stranger picked up a small branch and placed it into the fire. Tell me, he said, do you see the flame? Yes, but do you see what feeds it? The wood, the air, the hands that tend it. Elior nodded slowly. So it is with God. The stranger continued. Most people look for the flame. Few see the one who fuels it. Fewer still sit long enough to feel his warmth in the silence. Elior's eyes welled with tears, not of sorrow but of recognition. This man spoke not as a teacher, not as a prophet, but as one who had been in the same wilderness, one who had felt the same absence, one who had found God in the hiding. Who are you? Elior asked quietly. The stranger stood, just another seeker, like you, one who learned that God is not far but deep, not always loud but faithful, not always clear but real. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a small, hand-carved wooden token. It bore a simple engraving, a flame enclosed within a circle. For the journey, he said, handing it to Elior. Then he walked into the night. Elior sat there long after the fire burned down, the token warm in his hand, and though he was alone again, he felt accompanied, not by a man, but by the invisible yet present one. The next morning, Elior woke with a stillness in his heart he had not known before. He held the wooden token in his hand, tracing the circle and flame carved into its surface. The stranger's words echoed in his memory. God is not far but deep, not always loud but faithful. Elior had returned from the wilderness empty of answers but full of awareness. He no longer strained to hear a voice from the heavens. Instead, he listened to the quiet spaces of the earth and of his own soul And slowly something remarkable began to happen. He began to see, not with new eyes but with a new way of looking. The baker's hands, coated in flour as she kneaded the morning bread, he saw gentleness, devotion, and the sacred rhythm of creation. The laughter of children playing in the dust, he heard joy that echoed something eternal. Even the broken sandals of a passing traveler reminded him of the journey all souls must walk worn, unseen, yet full of purpose. He no longer asked, "Where is God?" Instead, he began to whisper, "There you are." One afternoon, he helped his elderly neighbor, Yarek, mend a broken fence. Yarek was known for his gruffness and quick temper, but as they worked together, Elior listened not just to Yarek's words, but to what lay beneath them. He heard pain in the man's complaints, loneliness and his anger. Elior responded not with advice but with presence. When they finished, Yarek turned to him, surprised by the silence that had passed between them. "You don't speak much," he said. Elior smiled. "I'm learning to listen more." Yarek nodded, then walked away with slower steps, as if something in him had softened. Later that evening, as Elior passed the village well, he saw a young woman kneeling beside it, her head bowed. Her name was Mara. Known for her sorrow, her husband had died the previous year, and she barely spoke since. Many passed her with pity or with silence, but Elior knelt beside her. They didn't speak. After a long moment, she looked at him. "Do you ever feel that God has forgotten you?" He didn't answer quickly. He met her eyes and said gently, "I once did. But I learned that sometimes his silence is not absence. It's an invitation to go deeper." She blinked, and tears gathered, not of despair, but of recognition. Elior didn't offer words of comfort. He simply sat beside her, letting the moment breathe. And in that shared stillness, he felt something holy, not because God had appeared in some grand revelation, but because God had already been there, in her sorrow and his silence, in their meeting. Later, as he returned home under the stars, Elior whispered a quiet prayer, not a plea, not a question, but a simple offering. "Let me see as you see." He no longer sought signs in the heavens. He had found the sacred in the soul. He no longer waited for a voice to thunder. He had discovered a whisper in every soul. He no longer reached outward for proof. He had begun to see with the eyes of faith, not the kind that demanded evidence, but the kind that recognized presence in the unseen. The days grew shorter. Autumn's breath cooled the hills, and the olive trees began to shed their leaves. Life in the village slowed, preparing for the long hush of winter. Elior continued his quiet rhythm, working the land by day, watching the stars by night. He listened deeply, loved quietly, and walked gently through the world. His heart, once frantic with seeking, had become a place of peace. But peace, like fire, is tested in darkness. It began with news from the northern road. Raiders had swept through nearby settlements, burning fields and stealing livestock. Fear spread like wine-fed flame. Families huddled in their homes. Men sharpened their tools into weapons. Women whispered prayers beneath their breath. Elior remained calm, not from ignorance, but from trust. But then the fear came to his own door. One evening, he returned to find his olive grove trampled, branches broken, fruit stolen. Deep tracks in the soil told the story strangers had come through in the night. He dropped to his knees, stunned. These trees were not just his livelihood, they were his offering. His quiet prayers lived in their roots, his trust in their branches. Gone, his first response was silence, then sorrow, then anger. He clenched his fists. "Why now, Lord?" he whispered. "I had learned to see you, to trust you. Wasn't that enough?" But the heavens gave no reply. He walked to the stream, his old place of listening. He sat, he waited. Nothing, no whisper, no warmth, only the cold rush of water and the ache of loss. For the first time in many months, Elior felt something return, not peace, not faith, but the old emptiness. "Have I fooled myself?" he thought. "Were the quiet moments just dreams? Did I shape a god from silence and call it you?" The doubt was sharp, cutting through everything he had built inside. He stayed by the stream all night, hoping for a sign, a word, a presence. But the silence remained, and yet somewhere in the stillness another voice began to speak. Not from the sky, not from beyond, but from within. It was not a voice of answers. It was the memory of love, the gentle way he had been drawn out of despair, the warmth of the fire that night with a stranger, the silent prayer beside Mara, the presence that had once visited his soul not with noise, but with being, and suddenly he understood. Faith is not proven by what we feel in the light. It is proven by what we hold on to in the dark. He closed his eyes, and with no sign, no miracle, no sound, he whispered, "Even if you do not speak, I will still wait. Even if I do not see, I will still believe. Even if you are hidden, I will still love." He opened his hands to the heavens, not demanding but surrendering. And though nothing changed around him, everything changed within him. The loss still hurt, the silence still remained, but the fear was gone, for he had walked into the night of absence and found a deeper presence still. Not in comfort, but in commitment. Winter arrived with winds that howled through the village streets, sweeping dust and memory across the stone paths. Fires burned low behind every door, and people spoke in hushed tones, as though the cold might steal their warmth if they were too loud. Not Elior, now a man of quiet strength, found himself visited more often than before, not by those seeking advice, but by those who simply wanted to sit in his presence. They came to him as they once had gone to the old well, thirsty, uncertain, worn from the road. He never claimed to have answers. He never preached. He simply listened, waited, and let silence speak. One evening, the village boy named Lev came to him. Barely 12, Lev was restless with questions, much like Elior had been in his youth. "Why doesn't God just show himself?" the boy asked, firelight dancing in his wide eyes. "If he's real, why not appear like a flash of lightning or a voice in the wind?" Elior smiled gently. "If he came like lightning, would you love him or just fear him? If he shot from the skies, would you follow him freely or only because you had no choice?" Lev blinked. I don't know." Elior leaned closer. "Sometimes love must come quietly so that it may be freely returned." The boy looked down at the ground, stirring dust with his toe. "But I want to feel something, anything." Elior nodded. "You will, but not always in the way you expect. Sometimes God comes in a question, sometimes in a silence, sometimes in the face of someone who simply stays." He reached into his cloak and took out the carved token, the flame within the circle. "I want you to have this." Lev took it with reverence, his fingers brushing the worn edges. "What does it mean?" "It means the fire is still burning, even when you do not see it. That God is near, even when you do not feel him, and that faith, Elior paused. Faith is not waiting for a sign, it's becoming one. From that day, Left came often, sometimes in silence, sometimes with tears, sometimes with 1,000 questions. Elior never turned him away. Others began to come too, a grieving mother who had buried her infant, a shepherd who had lost his flock in the storm, a widow with trembling hands and eyes that had seen too much. Elior did not offer them certainty. He offered them something rare: presence without pressure, love without condition, and faith without fear. And slowly, without even realizing it, he became something he had never set out to be: a guide, not of doctrines or dogmas, but of hearts. He pointed not to answers, but to awareness. He gave no sermons, but his life spoke. They called him the silent shepherd, though he owned no sheep. But he knew he was only a signpost, not the fire, not the light, only a hand pointing to the invisible yet present one. And this was enough. Years passed. The olive trees grew again, quiet witnesses to the seasons of Elior's life. The grove that had once been ravaged returned with unexpected abundance, branches bending with fruit. But Elior no longer looked to them as his anchor. His roots were elsewhere, buried not in soul, but in trust. He grew older, his hair silvered, his steps slowed, and still people came, not for miracles, not for teachings, but for something rare, a soul that had learned how to rest in the invisible. They came to sit with him beneath the fig tree, near the place where the stranger had once lit a fire. Some spoke of their grief, others of their joy. Many simply sat, feeling something they could not name: peace that was not passive, silence that was naughty. Elior would smile, often without words, and if he spoke at all, it was usually this: you don't need to see him to follow him. You don't need to hear him to love him. You only need to keep walking, for he walks with you, even when the road is dark. Eventually, the day came when Elior breathed his last. It was a quiet morning, with mist rolling over the hills and doves cooing gently in the olive branches. He passed in sleep, his hands folded, his face calm, as though he had merely slipped from one silence into another. The village mourned, not with loud cries, but with reverence. They buried him beneath the fig tree, where the fire had once burned. Someone carved a stone to mark the place, no name, just a symbol, a flame within a circle. Years turned to decades, children became elders. Seasons came and went, and still travelers stopped at that tree. Not all knew the story. Some only heard whispers of the man who listened to the one who saw without sight. But those who sat there, especially the weary, the seeking, the grieving, often felt something stir inside them, a quiet comfort, a gentle presence, an invisible yet unmistakable peace. And if they stayed long enough, they, too, would whisper prayer, not for signs or wonders, but for something deeper. Let me see as you see, for Elior's life had become what his heart had always longed to be, a doorway to the God who hides, not to punish, but to invite, who remains silent, not to abandon, but to teach, who is unseen, not because he is far, but because he is nearer than breath, and in the end, that invisible presence was the only one that remained, and the only one that mattered.